The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle. I got this book because if there's one thing all of the most successful groups and companies have in common, what is it? A lot of these books are about, that one thing, that framework, that strategy, that set of ideas, but all the things these books talk about are different. It's really all about growth. So I figured, well, it's a code of cultures. And how many well-known books actually highlight the importance and explain what's behind the scenes of the most successful corporate cultures, let alone successful cultures of any type? So that's why I got this book. The summary. The author Daniel Coyle begins by stating that the word culture comes from the Latin root cultus, meaning to care. Then he asks a question most people may or may not go their whole lives asking themselves. I know I certainly did until hearing something fascinating from 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen R. Covey, classic all-time bestseller in the whole field of self-help. The sum of all parts is greater than the whole. I was like, isn't the sum of all parts the whole itself? What's the difference? And I still don't know how to explain it. Interestingly enough, I've gone as many as 3 book reviews without mentioning my favorite book of all time, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, from which the term mastermind was popularized. This word is that idea in definite action. Having sold 120 million copies, Think and Grow Rich explains how the greatest fortunes are accumulated in the most well-known achievement-based philosophy probably of all time. Working with other people in groups, specifically in music or any artistic endeavor, is probably like one of my biggest weaknesses, if I had to pinpoint them. That's why I get books like this one, to kind of overcompensate for it. I'm just kidding. It's really to just kind of educate myself on the ways these things work that make them so helpful in today's quick-paced corporate world. Viz, group culture is one of the most powerful forces on the planet. We sense its presence in successful businesses and teams and thriving families. A strong culture increases net income 765% over 10 years, based on a Harvard study of over 200 of the world's top businesses. This author spent 4 years with 8 of the most successful groups in a divergence of areas because there were super high qualifications they met, ones that exceed what anyone would probably expect them to be. He talks about Google's capsizing of a far larger company named Overture at the time around its founding, which actually invented the pay-per-click business model, until a short few-day period that kind of changed everything. It all started when Larry Page walked in and wrote giant letters in the break room, "These ads suck." Knowing what I know about Larry Page, that made me smile. The rest of the story is told in the book. Coyle, the author, puts a great emphasis on safety that people feel when they're in these groups. There's a point in the beginning where he explains that many of supposedly cult-like companies have this ethos in their work environment where the scarcity of human belonging is no longer there, where it's almost addictive how comfortable you are and understood you feel by your peers. These senses of belonging are cultivated through a group of what Coyle calls belonging cues. Again, he puts an emphasis on safety and then goes on to talk about the highly effective San Antonio Spurs coach, his obsession on food and wine, and reasons for them, all of course involving unity. He talked about a study of feedback teachers gave to middle school students for their essays. The best feedback can be found in the quotes, so if you want to know what that is, just keep watching. But it is so effective that it resulted immediately in sustained grade performance improvement from a very high percentage of students. They called it magical feedback. He talks about the story of Tony Hsieh, the rise of Zappos, with its quirky culture, and its acquisition by Amazon. Something I found interesting about this made it seem so exclusive, like how only 1,500 people work for Zappos, and how you have a higher likelihood of being accepted into Harvard than to work there, as well as how they offer you $2,000 to quit, and how 1 in 10 people actually take them up on that offer. He talks about the leaders thanking the person first during gatherings who does the most humbling of tasks, like the restaurateur thanking the dishwasher, the stadium owner thanking those who clean the floors, or even the leader doing the tasks themselves. During any sort of off time, such as the manager or owner of a giant fast food company like McDonald's, picking up trash off the floor, or how it's important to send a message like a sort of beacon to say that everything we do is important and really connected and headed in one direction. He talks about creating spaces that maximize collision. Like if you move the coffee spot closer to workspaces, it will result in 20% productivity increase. Meanwhile, if you have everyone sit in 10-person tables instead of 4-person tables, it results in a 10% increase. He talks about the ineffectiveness of sandwich feedback, which is, something I will admit I have been guilty of trying to give people, because I thought it worked well enough. And apparently, well, It doesn't. It's where you say something positive and then something negative, and then you close it with something positive in order to remind them, hey, this is still good. Because research on optimal timing suggests that the last thing you say to someone in conversations is probably the thing they'll most likely remember in the future. So he talks about sandwich feedback versus the effectiveness of asking if they want feedback and then having a constructive conversation around that. The areas that need growth. Coming off as more genuine and well-intentioned than perhaps tactical and formulaic. He talks about Pink Panthers, who robbed stores, I think, across Italy and France of incredibly expensive jewelry, and how they studied everything about the stores they robbed for several weeks beforehand. He talks about how they behaved during the less than 45-second robberies like one collective mind, moving very smoothly together throughout the acts. He talks about vulnerability after explaining what Pixar calls their brain trust sessions, where other staff members pretty much pick apart everything about the films. Because it's like you and your team destroyed yourselves to make this one film, and now you show it to everyone else who works for your company, since you can trust that you are being given feedback by people you can really trust to be on your side at the end of the day. It's transparency. Total transparency. It's another great reason I love making YouTube videos. One of my greatest fears is being criticized and threatened and rudely told I'm doing something wrong. We live in a very fast-paced world. If people don't like something you make, they'll tell you. They will be super transparent about it, especially for some of them because it's behind a keyboard. And if you or I want to develop thicker skins, YouTube videos and making them is a phenomenal way to do that. Here's something else I found interesting from the book. I've found that whenever you ask a question, the first response you usually get is not the answer. It's usually just the first response. So I try to find ways to slowly surface things. You have to find a lot of ways to ask the same questions and approach the same question from lots of different angles. Then you have to build questions from that response to explore more. I mean, a lot of this book seems like it's meant to iron out the wrinkles of ineffective teamwork and make something beautiful out of the social or even societal flaws of human nature. That's just another reason it's so powerful. The human brain has a very social structure to it. If this weren't true, as a social platform, Facebook wouldn't have 2.6 billion monthly users on it. There's a great book that explores this called Social: Why Our Brains Are Wired to Connect with Each Other by Matthew Lieberman. At the end, the author of The Culture Code, Daniel Coyle, talks through this touching epilogue about his daughters and his experience teaching the writing class for their school's extracurricular activity. His daughters were obviously in the writing class too. What stood out to me about this, practically speaking, is the part where he talks about the useful feedback they gave each other when they shared each other's stories that they wrote, saying what went well and even better if. What stood out to me emotionally was just how quickly they all improved together and individually, and in what areas, which happened to be those that mattered most. Quotes, "It's not something you are, it's something you do. Any jackass can kick down a barn. It takes a good carpenter to build one. Just hearing something being said rarely results in a change in behavior. They're just words." I'm giving you this feedback because I have very high expectations and I know you can reach them. Hurry up and spank me so I can go outside and play. The more complex the problem, the more simple the solution. Hipsters do the right thing when no one is watching. Direction 1. I recommend Alexa. Stop. I recommend this book if you are like me and you are not the best in the world at working with other people. You think you're a little stubborn, which can be good, but you know it affects your life in ways you're not particularly proud of. I also recommend this book if you want to explore what a successful corporate culture looks like from the inside out rather than the outside in. Direction 2. If you like this book, I recommend checking out Social: Why Our Brains Are Wired to Connect, of course by Matthew Lieberman, about why we are compelled to trust strangers and let them influence our behavior, and lots of other things. That and Creativity Inc. by Ed Catmull, which talks a lot about Pixar's creative processes and company culture, and also a lot of like leaps and bounds and just obstacles that they had to hop over and like how they got through it. I feel like a lot of people starting any sort of company similar to Pixar, they can compress decades into days just by checking out that book alone. But it's all fascinating, and I feel like it dives a lot more into Pixar than this book does. I'm not sure why it wouldn't. The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle. There's a link to it in the description if you guys want to check it out and read the reviews. That and all the other books I mentioned in this video if you're interested in those too. If there are any other books that you guys want me to check out and review, please let me know in the comments below. If you checked out this book, what did you think? Did you like it? Make sure to leave a like if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already. If you could turn on that little bell to receive a notification every time I drop a new video, that would mean the world to me. Thank you guys so much for watching. You can find me everywhere, and I will see you then.